Okay, yeah, so the recording is just starting. I'll wait until that's started. Perfect. So once the session's over, I'll put this on OneDrive and send you a link to it, and then you can download it from there if that works for you.
Perfect.
All right, Jack, I've made you a presenter now, so you can take it away whenever you're ready.
That's great, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, so we'll start off briefly with our standalone products. And these are sort of the flagship Macrium Reflect products. And then you'll notice later on that when we look at Site Manager, that's mainly integrating these into a central management platform so that you can control backups from one central location. The most important part to understanding Macrium Reflect, though, I'd say, is getting to grips with these standalone products and the type of operations that they offer. So what you'll see here is that I'm using the technician's license. That's one of the standalone products that we offer. The other options are the workstation and server. Those are the kind of enterprise standalone offerings. The workstation edition's installed on client operating systems, and the server edition's installed on server operating systems. We have the home edition for home use, and we also have Server Plus that enables the backup of SQL and Exchange, and also the deployment and technicians kit. These come with the option of a portable application that can be run on computers without installing the full edition of Reflect. And I'll touch on the benefits of those a little bit more when we get to that. So to start with, the main operations that you'll be performing with standalone Reflect is imaging, cloning, and file and folder backups. Those are the various options for kind of backing up your data. So a disk image works at a block level and it backs up whole partitions and disks. File and folder backup is exactly that. It just backs up particular files and folders at a file level. And disk cloning will take partitions that you've specified and copy them one-to-one, uncompressed onto another disk. And with each of those, you get kind of particular use cases as well. So the most common operation that we'll see performed is a disk image, since it's extremely quick and it's a great way to back up a lot of data in one go. So to perform a disk image, it's a matter of selecting the disk, or if you want to back up multiple disks, there is the option here as well. Selecting the partitions that you want to back up. If we're backing up an operating system like we are in this instance, it's important to ensure that all the partitions with these Windows icons are included in them. Specifying a destination. You can also specify alternate locations. So for example, in this case, I'm backing up to the E drive. If the E drive was unavailable, then the next option in the list would be tried, and so on until it reaches a destination it can write to. And the main benefits of doing that is either you can have a failover destination for your backups, or in some cases we see people set up drive rotation where they have 6 USB drives and then they can just rotate it around each day and it will back up to whichever one is accessible at that point in time. We also have a set of advanced options that can be configured at any point during the image creation. These advanced options as well will carry over to the other types of operations, as you'll see in a minute. There are a couple of unique ones for each operation though. So as you'll see here, we have kind of the advanced options that you'd expect: compression to create smaller backups. We have encryption to password protect your backups, auto verification, which just ensures the integrity of the backups once it's been completed, the ability to add a comment, and also set in power saving options once the backup's completed. We also have the ability to send email notifications once a backup's completed, along with subject and contents for that as well. And that is configured in the advanced settings up here. On the second page, we have the schedules and retention rules. a schedule will just control when the backup's performed, essentially. So that instead of having to manually go and start the backup each time, when the schedule time is reached, that backup will trigger automatically. And to do this, we have a set of pre-defined templates. These are great for users that maybe don't necessarily know how often they want to perform backups and just want a quick template, or they're not too familiar with backup software, in which case these are industry standard templates, we say, since they are very common across backup software. However, if none of those fit the environment, they can also create their own custom schedule as well. So for this example, I'll just go with the grandfather, father, son. And this is a mix of full backups, differential backups, and incremental backups. The difference there being a full backup will back up everything on the partitions that we specified. A differential will include all the changes that have occurred since the last full backup, and an incremental backup will only back up the changes that have occurred since the last backup of any type. So the advantage here being that incremental backups are smaller and faster to create. However, if you want to restore one, you do need all the previous backups in the set present as well. And differentials are going to be smaller than full backups, but larger than incrementals. The main advantage here being that they're always only appended to the full backup. So I could create 6 differential backups, delete 5 of them, and still be able to restore the 6th differential backup. And we have the retention rules down here. These just control how many backups are stored in the destination at one time. So obviously, if we are creating automatic backups, that destination is going to start getting full eventually. This means we don't have to go in and manually purge backups. They will be purged automatically for us. So if I set this to keep, say, 1 full backup, when a second full backup is created, the first full backup will be deleted until the retention rules are satisfied. And the end result being that in this target folder, there will only ever be 1 full backup at any one point in time. And we have a couple of additional options down here as well. We can purge the oldest backup set if less than a certain amount of space is available. The main benefit for this being that, if it's more important for new sets to be created than retaining old sets, if the space drops below a certain threshold, the oldest backup sets in the destination set will be purged to make space for the newest one. And we have the option to run the retention rules before the backup as well. And then on the final page, we have a bit of a summary of the backup that we're about to create. I'm just going to go back and uncheck the C drive. We don't recommend doing this if you are backing up your operating system. You obviously want all of the operating system partitions involved, but to save some time, I'm just going to reduce that to a few system partitions. And then we have the option to save this as a backup definition file, which I'll touch on a bit more in a second, and the option to run this backup now or not. So we'll save it as a definition and run the backup. This will open Reflect Monitor, and you'll see this with the logs as well. This just gives us an overview of what's happening during the backup. So if for whatever reason that backup had failed, we get an error message here, but we can go back over and look at the operations it's performed. So since we saved it as a backup definition file, the options and settings that we specified are now shown in the definitions files tab. The main benefit of this being that it makes it extremely easy to then go in and run the exact same backup again. We don't have to go through all those steps of reconfiguring the backup. So as you can see, this has performed the exact same backup. It's got those 3 partitions and also the settings that I specified before. And at any point in time, we can edit that definition file to change the partitions that are included or the options that we've specified. Along with that, we also have a couple of additional options that I'll touch on in a moment. So back to the local disks, which is sort of the main tab of Reflect. This is where you'll be performing the different operations. If we have a quick look at cloning a disk, so as I mentioned, this reads from the disk in the same way. It's reading block at a block level, and it's copying partitions across to the destination. The main difference being when that backup that we just created completed, it's created an MRIMG file. That's our proprietary file format. And that's created a backup in there that we can then restore at a later point in time. The difference with a clone is that they won't be copied. It won't create an image file on the destination. It will copy the whole partitions uncompressed onto the destination. So I won't perform this since it is a destructive operation. It will delete partitions on the destination to do this. But if I select copy there, this is what the destination disk would look like once that clone's completed. As you can see, each partition has been copied across and all of the data in those partitions as well. And the other operation that we'll touch on quickly is a file and folder backup. So the main advantage of disk images are that they can back up whole partitions extremely quickly. In some instances, though, you might not want to copy a whole partition. You know, I give you an example of an accounting firm. They might have a lot of important spreadsheets. You don't want to back up, say, a terabyte of data just to copy these 4 spreadsheets, in which case you can use a file and folder backup, go in and select in particular files and folders. So I could back up my desktop here, select a destination. There's also include and exclude rules so that you can narrow down what files are included from the folders that you've specified. We have the same options here for the schedule and retention rules. And then at the end, you'll see the same summary as well. And the main advantage of this is that if you are copying individual files and folders that maybe change a lot, this can often be quicker than backing up the whole partitions. So those are the main backup operations. I'll briefly touch on restoring as well. So while we're discussing individual files and folders, as you saw there, you can back up individual files and folders, but if you've created a disk image, you don't necessarily have to restore the whole partition. So for example, if I go into the existing backups tab, which is where backups are managed, you can get a breakdown, a sort of graphical breakdown of the what's included in the backup. So we could either restore the whole backup by using the restore button here. Alternatively, we can use the browse button, and this would let us mount one of the partitions. So if we use these options here, this will now be mounted as a virtual drive in Windows. It's empty since it is just a system partition, but I could go in and select particular files and folders that were included in the backup and copy those out of the image. And the main advantage there being, again, suppose I have imaged a partition with those important spreadsheets on it, I could just mount the backup and take those spreadsheets out of it instead of having to restore the whole volume. When it comes to restoring the backup, backups can either be restored from within Windows. However, if you are restoring a system partition, it does require those partitions to be unmounted, since essentially you're trying to restore Windows while you're still booted into it. And I'll show you what that looks like now. However, suppose I was restoring, say, a data partition from within Windows, I could just restore that normally using the Reflect UI. If I'm attempting to restore a system partition, I'll receive this message, which essentially says, you know, you're booted into Windows, we can't dismount the drives, perform it from within the rescue media. I could either automatically build that now, and it will boot into the rescue media and perform the restore. Alternatively, I can go into the other tasks menu here and create rescue media manually. And this is one of the first things that we recommend doing after installing Macrium Reflect. The rescue media is a bootable environment that allows you to restore images in the event that you're unable to access the main Reflect application. So, for example, if my Windows OS suddenly stopped booting, I wouldn't be able to boot into Windows to restore an image. So that's where I'd attach my rescue media, use it to boot the computer, and then perform the restore that way. The other example is if I want to restore an image to a bare metal machine that hasn't got an operating system on it, I'd use the USB drive to boot and perform the restore that way. Since I'm using a virtual machine, there's no USB option here. But if I had connected a USB drive to the computer, you'd see that show up here. We also support creating ISO files, a Windows boot menu option, which is stored on a local drive and adds an option to the boot menu. Or you could create a USB drive as well, and CD and DVD as well. So to build this, you select the option that you want. You can see in the advanced options here, we have a few different options. The rescue environment is based on either Windows RE or Windows PE. So that's the Windows recovery environment or the Windows pre-installation environment. We download Windows PE directly from Microsoft and use the necessary components to build the rescue media. Windows RE comes pre-installed as part of modern operating systems, so selecting this option would not require any further downloads. We have some additional options here. You can change the architecture of your rescue media. There's additional options for adding BitLocker support. So if I'm backing up and restoring BitLocker volumes, we'd recommend doing that as well. In the devices and drivers, since it's a virtual machine, this is empty. But this would give a breakdown of the hardware that's connected to my system. So if I have a RAID card in here, that will show up here. And the status will tell me whether it's included in the rescue media or not, whether I need to take any action to get that supported. And that's just to ensure that these hardware devices function correctly while I'm booted in the rescue media. Suppose I'm storing my images on a network location, I'd need to make sure that I have a driver for my network card here to make sure I can access those backups. Once we're happy with the options, we can create the rescue media, and then in the event of disaster, we can use that to boot the computer. So while that's creating, I'll touch briefly on this additional option down here, which is create portable technicians rescue media. And this comes back to those versions of Reflect that I mentioned before. So the technicians and deployment kit comes with an option to create technicians rescue media. And the main advantage of that is that you create this rescue media, it can still be used to boot a computer as necessary. But it also contains a Reflect portable application, which can be launched within Windows without installing Reflect. So the main sort of examples I give there are, say, the technician's license. One example could be a technician who runs a computer repair shop. If a customer brings in a computer and he's going to be working on it, you don't want to be installing software on that computer since it doesn't belong to the technician, but you also want to have a backup of it in the event that anything happens to the operating system. They could connect this portable application, run Reflect and create an image without installing any software on that. And the deployment kit contains the same option, but that's slightly more focused on deploying an image out to a number of computers instead of backing up and restoring to the same computer.
Would that also include servers as well?
Sorry, what was that?
When you were saying then about I think it was the site license for the deployment, we were saying to mass computers, is it also possible to do it to servers as well?
Yeah, that's correct. So the deployment and technician's license, essentially, you install them, you get a Macrium Flex Server Edition installer. You install that on a computer on the network. It doesn't have to be the computer you want to image. I normally give the example of installing it, on a technician's laptop. You can then create these portable applications, and those can be used on Server Edition or client operating systems as well. So once this is created, we'll look briefly at the rescue media as well. I'll also touch on a couple of the advanced options that I can show you in a bit more detail. The advanced options, we can sort of break it down into ViBoot, Macrium Image Guardian, and Change Block Tracker. So the first one I'll show you will be Image Guardian. What Macrium Image Guardian does essentially is it installs a filter driver, and what that does is deny any kind of write access to Macrium image files, Macrium backup files, so it protect file and folder backups, SQL backups as well. And then any third-party attempts to modify a Macrium Reflect backup will be blocked. And the main use case for this is preventing, unauthorized access, say by ransomware that might try to encrypt backup files, and accidental deletion as well. So in the event that this system became infected with ransomware, it'd start encrypting files. When it attempts to encrypt the image file, they'd get a toast notification that pops up and says blocked an unauthorized operation. So I can show you that now. The Image Guardian is controlled through the UI with the Image Guardian settings here. So I can turn it on and also select the volumes that I want it to run on. So since I'm only using the E drive as a destination, it's only enabled on the E drive. If I then went into File Explorer and attempted to delete one of these backups, let's delete this one. I get a notification saying we've blocked unauthorized access. And that's because I've attempted to delete it using File Explorer instead of deleting it through the Reflect UI. And you get the same notification if ransomware tried to encrypt one of these files, for example. The next feature is Change Block Tracker. There's not too much to show with Change Block Tracker. It more runs in the background. Change Block Tracker runs in a similar way, though, where it installs a filter driver, and it essentially keeps a log of all the changes that are happening to a volume. It's indicated by this icon of a running man. So if this was running on my C drive, I'd create a backup, say a full backup, Change Block Tracker would activate, and it'd start keeping note of any changes that are happening to the volume. When I then perform an incremental backup, it will go and immediately back up those changes without having to search for them. So all that does essentially is speed up incremental backups by reducing the amount of time it takes to find those changes. The next advanced feature is Macrium Viboot. And how Macrium Viboot works is you select an image file. So I'll show you in here. So I don't think I have an image installed. I will show you on sorry about that. We'll circle back to Viboot in a second. I'll just start creating an image in the background. I accidentally deleted one of the images before. Okay, so again, this is the image wizard that you saw before. I select the partitions and then we'll just click through and run this. So once this image is being created, I'll show you Viboot. As a kind of quick overview, how Viboot works is you select an image file and then use Viboot. It will boot that image up as a virtual machine instantly. So the main use case there is for kind of, if you wanted to update an image file, we say you can boot it as a virtual machine, make some changes, and then create a new image. Or instant failover as well. And we've used that ourselves at Macrium, where a business critical server's gone down. We select an image of it, Viboot it, and we have a virtual machine to instantly take the place of the system that's broken. And then that can just run continuously while the system is repaired. So while that image creates, I'll move on to the next part, which is Site Manager, and we'll come back to Viboot in a moment. So Macrium Site Manager essentially is central management for your backups. If we think of Reflect backing up individual endpoints, we then add those to Site Manager, and we can manage those backups from one central location. Remember the password. So site managers installed on a machine somewhere on the network. And then what we can do is start adding computers to be managed centrally using this computer. One of the great things about Site Manager as well is that it allows you to start centrally managing the licensing for computers as well. So suppose I had 20 endpoints that I want to back up. You can install Reflect on each one of those endpoints and license them all individually. Alternatively, we can add those endpoints to Site Manager and begin managing them using the Site Manager UI. And what we can do is add license keys directly to the Site Manager user interface, and that will handle the licensing for those endpoints automatically. So just as an example, I have here what's known as a Macrium agent license, and this contains a number of seats. So we could add this to the Site Manager user interface. It has 5 seats. So I could add up to 5 computers to Site Manager, and each one will pull one of these licenses down to use. So as you can see, that computer that you just saw has now become licensed and connected. That backup, which I started running manually on Reflect as well, you can see in the UI here that it's detected that a backup operation is being performed. So it keeps track of anything that's happening on standalone Reflects as well, if those are managed using Site Manager. So the first step to using Site Manager is to add the computers. As you can see, I've already added one here. There are several ways that you can add a computer to Site Manager. It has Active Directory integration using LDAP. So we could search the Active Directory domain and start pulling computers out of that. If network discovery is enabled on a computer, we can enable this and they will start connecting to Site Manager. Or the most common one that we tend to see is manually specifying computers. So you could enter, however many computers here, IP address, DNS, NetBIOS, and then as long as Site Manager is able to communicate with those computers, they will be added here. Once a computer's been added, you can then use install agent. And this installs the Macrium agent or the Site Manager agent onto those endpoints. And that's what's used to start backing up those computers.
With
The
that,
Site Manager.
sorry to interrupt. When you are obviously adding machines to Site Manager, is there a maximum number of machines that you can add at one time?
No, I don't believe there's any limit on that. The main sort of limiting factor that we've seen in some cases is by the amount of computers that an organization has. We have test environments where we've added upwards of 200, 300 computers, and there's no issues using those with Site Manager.
So Site Manager, is that running off, say, a SQL database in the background, or is that just purely using your solution?
So this is purely our solution. I don't believe there's any kind of SQL databases running on the back end. We have internal kind of databases that Site Manager compiles and manages. So I'll show you those briefly now. We go to Macrium. All of the Site Manager files you'll be able to see in here. So there's a lot of logging involved. And then we have things like repository info.db. So as you'll see in a minute, a repository is just a storage area that's predefined to store backups. The repository info.db is just going to keep track of those repositories and information about them. And then these files are used by Site Manager to manage the actual environment. And you'll see these kind of databases pop up in a few different locations as well. So once those computers have been added, the next steps is somewhat similar to you saw with standalone reflect. So we have the definition again, which might ring bells from the definition file before. So if I do test2, and we can create a disk image or a file and folder backup again. And we can then, on the next tab, select computers manually using this checkbox, or we can do it by tag as well. And essentially, the tags in Site Manager are just a way to simplify managing large number of backups. So there's predefined tags down here that you can see. So we have, you know, we have the computer 64-bit or 32-bit. We have the operating system version. Since I only have one Windows 10 computer connected, selecting that will search and show me those computers. And we have licensing information as well. However, we can also manually create user tags as well. So I could create one called Office, and then I could add a tag, say, for Manchester. And then I could select computers. So this computer is actually installed in our Manchester office. I could select that and add it here. Then I could add another tag for London and select all of the computers that are in London. And then if we go back to the computers page here, you'll be able to see our user created tag here. So if I select Manchester, it will show me only the computers with that tag. And the main sorry,
so with Site Manager as well, then rather than using Macrium Reflect itself, as an administrator, let's say, can I actually take one of the images that is stored, say, on a network share and fire it up in the virtual machine while, say, another user is on that image? Or is it only one person at one time that could, say, be on a machine and edit the image?
So I believe with the Viboot, once that is Vibooted, it will be locked down to the kind of one Viboot session. How it works essentially is instead of kind of loading that information into a virtual machine, a couple of different VHDs are created. One of those is a difference in disk, so any changes made to the virtual machine are written to the difference in disk. And we have another one that contains a sort of blank. It's basically a blank VHD, but it contains a bit of a description of the different disks that are included in the image that are then used by the virtual machine. And then the data for the virtual machine is read directly from the image file. So that's why it's able to boot up so quickly. We're not reading everything from the virtual machine, from the image, and then dumping it into a VHD. We're reading data directly from the image file. I can quickly show you Viboot in a little bit more detail now that that image is being created.
Because what I will typically do is I used to be a partner with a company called Venbu. I was
Yeah.
an MSP at the time, and customers back up their data to one of my data sites.
Yeah.
And what a typical recovery environment would be, so for example, say a school, they would have their admin systems fire up, say, in one virtual machine,
Yeah.
and at the same time they will then set up another virtual machine, and they would then start recovering, say, the data shares that everyone would have access to, so that way it's running in the background.
Yeah, so I'd say in terms of that, your best bet would probably be to have one virtual machine, one image file running the virtual machine from. So I could select this image, Viboot from this, and then you could either copy that image file to another location and use that to recover. In which case, then you've got this image which is being used for Viboot whilst you're restoring another image, which is just a copy of this one. And that kind of brings us back as well to you'll see in a second with Site Manager at least, the remote synchronization. We always recommend having more than one copy of your backups anyway, since, you know, suppose I'm storing all my backups on a NAS and then that NAS breaks all of a sudden. having another location with those images will ensure that I'm still able to recover as well. So for Viboot to run, you need a hypervisor installed. Currently, we support Microsoft Hyper-V and Oracle VirtualBox. I'd recommend Hyper-V where possible, but in cases where Hyper-V can't be used, VirtualBox can be used instead.
Would you be looking at adding VMware at a stage? Because I do have a big contract with VMware and a couple of customers. Or is it just keep sticking to what you currently offer?
I'm afraid I'm not too sure on that one. I'd have to ask one of the developers about the roadmap. After this call, I can send off an email and see if I can get any more info about that for you.
Perfect.
So, as you saw on the existing backups tab, we have the different images that I've created. It can be done using the Macrium Reflect UI, or we can use the Viboot standalone application. What was that? Which you can see is installed as well. To use Viboot, it does install this standalone application, which can be used to Viboot the images. But using the UI, it's as simple as selecting the image that you want to Viboot, selecting the Viboot icon. That will open the Viboot UI. We're specifying settings for the virtual machine, so the amount of startup RAM and processors. We can also specify network connectivity for that virtual machine. And then if I select finish, that will start creating the virtual machine for us. This might be a little on the slow side since I'm using nested virtualization. But once that's created, you'll see that the virtual machine will boot at the point in time of the image we created. And since we created that image just a second ago, you'll see that the virtual machine is essentially of the current machine. So in this example, you can almost think of it as like, suppose I have a web server that's gone down. I could ensure this has network connectivity, boot it up as a virtual machine, and then this could take the place of the actual web server while we're running maintenance on that. In an ideal world as well, you'd be assigning it more than 1 gig of memory and 1 CPU core. But since it is nested virtualization, I'm running with fewer resources.
Well, what I'll do is I'll ask you a couple of questions whilst that just boots up in the meantime. Then, so
Yeah, definitely.
with a couple of the other vendors, obviously you get support, but they offer different levels of support depending on the type of package you've got. What is
Yes.
support like with yourself? Is it what you pay is what you get, or depending on obviously the package? How does support work, and what levels do you offer?
I think Sabrina will be able to provide more information regarding that. I believe the 2 levels though were standard support and premium support.
Yeah. So it does depend on kind of how much you pay. So you can pay a little bit extra to get that premium support. Premium support is 24/7. You're able to call us, access, our online help desk, ticketing support. So it's quite similar to the regular support, aside from the fact that it is 24/7 around the clock, and you are able to call us whenever you like, really.
What remote support solution do you use if you actually need to connect to a customer's site?
We use Zoho Assist for the remote support.
Okay, that's good. The other 2 questions are: do you offer 2 previous builds before the latest? If you're on version 10, would you be able to give me version 8? Because some schools, obviously in the UK, have to run 2 builds prior to the latest. My local council being one of them. Is that something that could be offered?
Yeah, so I can't imagine there's an issue with that. I imagine since essentially you can break Reflect down into versions. So the most recent ones are version 6, 7, and 8. We're currently on version 8. However, if you look up here, we have version 8.0.6979. So I'm running a few builds behind at the moment anyway. Would it be one of these more numbered builds that you'd be looking for instead of version 6?
No, it would be version 6.
I'm afraid I'm not too sure on that one. We can offer, earlier builds of, say, version 8. So if you version 8.1 will be coming out in the relatively near future. If you did want an installer for a previous build of version 8, we would be able to give you that.
Okay. That is a big thing for me. I work with 6 Academic Trust, and that is a big thing for them to be 2 previous builds. When I've worked with them on other contracts, I've made them aware, obviously, that it's not really advised and that in previous builds there's bugs, etc.
Yeah.
But because it's governed by, obviously, the council and the awarding body, there's no way around it. I have took it to the council, and that could take anywhere up to 12, 14 weeks just for it to be reviewed, and then it's got to be assessed and looked at again.
Yeah.
So what I would be looking to do is first of all to find an answer out to that if possible, and then if not, what I would do is I would go back to the skills and say, look, actually we can't go 2 full builds behind, but actually what we can do is we can go say 2 builds behind on the latest version, like you just discussed then, because I know that is a bit of a deal breaker as such, which is a bit annoying at times because it does lose the deal. But that is possibly the biggest challenge that I actually do face at the moment with my clients.
Yeah, so definitely, like you mentioned as well, if we look in the release notes here, so we got version 8.6979 now. We could go back to say like version 8.5946. We could definitely give installers for those. I'm not sure, Sabrina, if we still sell version 6, as I believe that's now classed as a more end of life product.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure either. I'm not sure that we do, to be honest, on the website.
I'll just try and push it then for version 8.1 and see what they say. Because I've got a couple of skills that are coming within the next 2 months. So I'm already feeding them little bits of information. I want to try to get that in as soon as possible so that there's no issues later down the line where they say, is it possible to get a build? And then it's obviously getting a bit too close to time. So what I would usually do is give them as much information beforehand, and then to buy a bit of time, what I'd do is I'd give them a 30-day trial. So then obviously they can get familiar to the solution, make sure it's the right, and obviously they can test it in their environment. And then once they've done that, it'd be a case of working with them to get the right price, obviously, the right products to meet the need. And then the final thing is reporting. What type of reports do you offer? Because some of the businesses that I work with do reporting and they take it to the management team.
Yeah, can you expand on what type of reporting you're thinking of?
So within other vendors that we work with, there are many options to do reporting. You could do a PDF report or an Excel report, for example. But let's just do a PDF report. We can select what backups have been taken, how much data has been backed up, where the data has been allocated, say on the network share, how much space is free, what machines have been backed up, what backups have been succeeded, what backups have failed.
Okay,
that would basically go to the management team saying, look, this solution's working. There's the report.
Yeah, definitely. So, as you mentioned, the reporting is a bit more in depth in Site Manager, so I'll quickly run through that in a second. On the standalone Reflect, as you see here, a log is created for every backup that's run, basically, and I can show you these logs. You can email these out as well. I believe they're HTML logs, so they're viewable in any browser. If I quickly show you one of these, so this is that full image that I created a moment ago for Viboot, and you can sort of see the type of information that's included in this. So it's the amount of data that's being backed up, when the backup kicked off, partitions that are included, and the destination as well. So this will tell you exactly where on the network or on the local machine of the computer that the image is being saved. It also tells you, the size of the image that was completed. So there's quite a lot of information in here. And as I briefly touched on before as well, if we look in the advanced options, we have the email settings here, so you can configure your SMTP settings in here, and then any backup that fails, let's say, I could do send email notification, enter a bit of a message, and include the log as well. So suppose a backup failed on one of my computers, I'd receive an email saying this computer's backup's failed, and I'd have a HTML attachment of that log as well.
With Insight Manager, would you be able to control updates by any chance?
Defer updates, was that?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So if we have a quick look here in Site Manager, when a new update is available, it'll come up as check for updates. There's no automatic update, in Site Manager. You'll be notified when a version's available, and then it's kind of manual. Because we've bearing in mind a lot of companies do like to stay a couple of small releases behind as well, since there's the whole thing of you never know how stable an update's going to be for any software. So we do have some enterprise users, for example, that would stay around 689, 6898 down here. And quickly show you the reporting in Site Manager as well. The logging is the same, so it's HTML logs. They're saved by the agents. Those are viewable here. We can download them. That's HTML here. We can print them out. And if we look in the settings, the Site Manager login's a bit more in-depth, since it is more customizable. So if we go into the notifications tab here, we have the same SMTP options here. You specify your SMTP server that's used to send out those notification emails. And then in notifications, we can select the type of notifications we want to receive. So for backup fails, we can receive a notification for that, etc. And along with that as well, in the email tab, we have the notification email here, the backup summary. So what I can do is enable this, and then daily at a time that I specify, this will give me an overview of the entire Site Manager. So every and all backup that's happened will be included in this summary, and then you can just sort of have a rundown and get an overview of what's happening in that Site Manager. And we can select, what's included in here as well. So if I uncheck these, I could click, when it started, the definition that ran it, and where it's saved to. And the main advantage of that is obviously if we're managing, 20 odd computers, it's helpful just to have one attachment that's got everything you need in it. So just to very quickly go back to the Viboot that's finished booting. As you can see here, the image that we created, if I have a look at the desktop, has now booted as a virtual machine. So this would be able to take the place of this physical computer. And as I mentioned with updating the image as well, suppose I've created an image for my computer and I, want to deploy it out somewhere. I could create a document on that machine, go back into the Site Manager UI, select that virtual machine, turn it off first, and then select backup, and that will create a new backup of the virtual machine, including any changes that I've made whilst using that virtual machine.
I must admit, I do like the simplicity of how a virtual machine is created, and obviously, I know the speed is different. Obviously, in your lab, But I know
Yeah.
in the real environment it would be a lot faster because obviously you can specify the requirements. I do like that speed and the use of it because I know with a competitor, the way their virtual machines are created is it creates it and then it boots. But the problem is once it's booted and say you're logged in, it then has to finalize. So even though you're
Yeah.
logged in, it then has to automatically reboot twice. And obviously that's downtime.
Yeah, not ideal.
So it's not really ideal. And that is another reason why we're looking to move away. And I think what you've shown me here is everything that I would usually look at and request. Obviously, you've answered the questions that I need. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to take this recording, show it to a couple of people. I'm finishing work on the 21st, Sabrina, for about 2 weeks. So we'll keep you updated on what's going on because I'm still waiting for a phone call. Can we stop the recording there, please?
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned as well, we've only sort of briefly touched on Site Manager. So if you do want another kind of webinar setup like this in the future, I can go over Site Manager in more detail for you as well and get you a recording of that.
What I was